we'll be looking at behavior. That's what we'll be doing. So you need to quickly get your biro, your writing materials. We'll be fast a little bit because we have so much to cover. So talking about behavior, we need to understand today that we'll talk about what behavior is. Apart from talking about what behavior is, we'll speak about the types of behavior, classification of behavior. Why do we study behavior? These are some of the things we'll look at today. And basically, I will begin by, defining behavior. And that is the aggregate of all the responses made by an organism in any situation. So behavior is the aggregate of all the responses made by an organism in any situation. Okay, you also need to know that a specific response of a certain organism to a specific stimulus or group of stimulus will also be defined as behavior. And when we are talking about behavior within the confines of psychology, we are not just talking about human behavior alone, we're also talking about animal behavior. And you need to know that animals adapt their behavior according to the requirements of the current situation. And a wide range of sensory organs in the man's nervous system or the animal's nervous system, they bring in information within and without. When I talk about, sensory organs, I'm talking about things like organs of sight, things like organs of smell, or the skin itself, organ of taste, organs of sight, organ of hearing. These are the sources from where information come into the nervous system that affect the manner by which behaviors are aggregated and demonstrated. And of course, the central nervous system most times will be the progenitor or the source of most behaviors. Of course, you are going to learn later that there's something we call mind-brain relationship or mind-brain interaction. So we'll talk about that maybe a little later on. Basically, we also need to know that when we are talking about behavior, there's something we call nature-nurture controversy. Nature-nurture controversy. Nature-nurture controversy. When we talk about nature-nurture controversy, is the debate on which we are talking about the source of influence that bring behavior to being or to pass. Okay, some people will say it is in nature. Nature meaning to a little extent genetic traits, inherited traits that they in one way or the other affect behavior. Some also are saying nurture, which means circumstances of one's environment. Well, I must say today, that is after the 20th century or from the mid-20th century, there's been a shift from the role of genetics, talking about nature, in defining exclusively an individual's personality. It's now believed that there are very many factors within an individual's environment that can in one way or the other affect behavior. Okay. Researchers are beginning to look for techniques and manners by which we can scientifically quantify the independent and joint influences of nature and nurture factors in human behavior. And of course, studies are still going on these. Now we need to talk about sequence of behavior. When I talk about sequence of behavior, what are the primary activities? What are the primary events that happen? And where does it impact or make influence in an organism? And how does this translate to behavior? That's what we want to talk about when we say, sequence or causation of behavior. Behavior is a result of interaction between an individual and situations. Behavior is a result of interaction between an individual and situation. Okay, living things and non-living things to an extent respond to stimulus situation. And somebody will be quick to say, you talked about non-living things having behavior. How possible is that? But you realize when certain solids are heated, they have a response to that stimulus and they expand. That's a form of behavior. But the behavior that we'll be more interested in within the domain of psychology is living things behavior. That is concerning animals and humans. And of course, there's a sequence that you'll find in the process by which human behavior will come. Somebody is saying you can't see the slides. You cannot see the slides because you disrupted the flow and the loading of the slides right from the beginning. So some people claimed host and we couldn't. The slides are there and we could not
You guys left the kidney. You're not doing.
Mute your mic. Mute your mic. Whoever is there, mute your mic. Mute your mic. We are here for serious business. Mute your mic. Mute yourself. And whoever is raising the hand, put your hand down, because I am going to address the content of the lecture within the limits of the time that is remaining, because we succeeded in wasting 26 minutes of our very, very valuable time. Okay, those in four sequential ways. We have what we call stimulus situation. Apart from stimulus situation, we have organism. Apart from organism, we have behavior. After behavior, we have accomplishment. I'll take it again. In other words, step by step, what are the things that will happen between the time an ideation of a behavioral process commences, the time it gets manifested? What are the series of events that we're going to record? And there are four things that you need to know under that heading. And there are the four things are: 1, stimulus situation; 2, organism; 3, behavior; and 4, accomplishment. So, talking about the first one there, which is stimulus situation. It may be in form of taste or any other thing, as I have said earlier, that there are certain organs of sensation and perception that most times will affect the manner by which an organism receives impulses that eventually translate to behavior. So the first thing you talk about when you're talking about in sequence or causation of behavior is stimulus situation. The next thing you talk about is what we call organism. Organism. This is the creature that is exposed to a stimulus situation. This is usually a human or non-human being, as I said earlier, okay, but that is sufficiently responsive to any stimulus that you're introducing. Of course, factors such as heredity, maturation, attitudes, values, biological needs, learning experiences may also interplay when it comes to the nature of stimulus that an organism will want to respond to. So, having talked about stimulus, having talked about organism, the next thing is the behavior itself. This is the product of the organism's response to a stimulus, manifested in a specific behavior, and behavior expression, crying, or whatever. And of course, having talked about stimulus situation, organism, behavior, the last in the series of events is what we call sequence or causation of behavior. Sequence or causation of behavior. So the last element there is accomplishment. So the formula is SOBA: 1, stimulus situation; 2, organism; 3, behavior; and 4, accomplishments. Accomplishment is the latest sequence in is what happens when the stimulus situation causes changes in the organism, prompting the organism to manifest a behavior. And when that behavior is manifested in accomplishment, the stimulus is eliminated, the response also is eliminated, and the organism returns to its status quo. That is the nature or state that the organism was before that stimulus came in the first instance. The next very important thing we want to talk about now is classification of behavior. Classification of behavior. Classification of behavior. Of course, psychologists often classify behavior into two main categories. And the two main categories include: 1, overt and covert. Overt is OVERT, and covert is COVERT. So psychologists often classify behaviors into those two categories, that is overt and covert. But there are many other ways of classifying behavior. And of course, the other ways by which you classify behavior could be in terms of whether the behavior is visible or whether it's not visible. That's 1. I hope you are writing. Whether behavior is visible, whether it's not visible. 2, whether behavior, we also talk about the nature of the behavior communication pattern. The nature of the behavior communication pattern. That's another way by which you classify behavior. The third way by which you classify behavior is the way in which human beings or animals react to various stimuli or stimulations. The way in which human beings or animals react to various stimuli or situations. Also,
you are too fast, sir.
I must be too fast because you took 26 minutes of my time. I've told you, here it is serious business. The 26 minutes means so much. So you need to be just up your game, full stop. I'll try to repeat where necessary. But some of you went to play host. When you are not lecturer, you went to use lecturer's platform and you blocked access to the lecturer to have access to that class. You should know right from the beginning that in you are any. Well, we'll find out those who even did that after the lecture. I'm still talking about sequence or constellation of behavior. So sequence or constellation of behavior, I said 1 is stimulus situation, 2, I thought about organism, 3, I thought about behavior, and the last in the series is accomplishments. That's talking about series or constellation of behavior. Okay. The next thing we want to talk about is classification of behavior. How do we classify behavior? And I said behaviors can basically be classified into 2 main headings: overt and covert. Overt and covert. So I'll talk about what we mean by each of these things. But apart from classifying behavior as overt or covert behavior, there are other ways by which psychologists classify behavior. And that's what I was mentioning before that interruption. So behavior can also be classified based on 1, whether the behavior is visible or not visible. That is, whether the behavior is visible or not visible. 2, whether also by the communication pattern of that behavior. That's another way by which we classify behavior. I said basically behaviors are classified into 2, overt and covert. And I also said there are other ways by which psychologists classify behaviors. And I said I'm going to mention about 6 or so of other mechanisms by which we classify behavior. And of course, 1 is whether the behavior is visible or not visible. 2 is the behavior communication pattern. Behavior communication pattern. Behavior communication pattern. The third one is the way in which human beings or animals, react to various stimuli or situations. We can also use that to classify behavior. I'm going to take that again. I said 1, we can classify it basically as 2, overt or covert. We can also classify it based on 6 other criteria. And I said 1 is whether behavior is visible or not visible. 2, the behavioral communication pattern. 3, the way in which human beings or animals react to various stimuli or situations. We can also classify behavior based on rationality. And of course, I would suggest psychology rep. Hello, is the psychology rep online? Let the psychology rep respond. If the psychology rep is online, is the psychology rep online? Representative of psychology department, are you on?
Yes.
Okay, if you are on, I will pause a little bit to quickly go back, bend a little backward, send your WhatsApp number to me so that I can forward the slides to you so that you can now share and give to all the students. Okay, so it will be your duty, but you have blocked my access to be able to share from the university Zoom. I will do that now. Pause a little bit to be able to share those slides with you because I'm struggling to catch up on the 26 minutes that we lost earlier. So send that to my WhatsApp now so that I can forward the slides to you without needing to distort my class. Okay. Simplicity. How simple is that process? Level of thought process. And of course, you can classify behavior also based on the level of voluntariness. How voluntary is that behavior? We can also use that to classify behavior. I will now take my time to explain what each of these things, what they stand for one by one, so that right from the beginning, you can have a good grasp of what we mean by each of those concepts as we proceed into our Psych 101. Okay? So I will begin with the first one I call overt behavior. Overt behavior is O-V-E-R-T behavior. When we say something is overt, it's an adjective that describes something done or shown openly. So when something is manifest, when something can be readily seen, we'll say it is overt. Okay? So behaviors that you can readily see, that you don't need to, bind and loose before seeing. That's a that kind of overt behavior. And of course, overt behavior